back with our resident expert for Toronto, Emma Pace.
To be honest, this is probably some of the most exciting or interesting data that I think we need to follow over the next couple months, because we haven't really seen this in a while. And with interest rates still being very low, the overall returns for condo investments, they could be some of the best that we've seen in the last couple of years.
What is up, YouTube? Matt McKeever here, and we're back with our resident expert for Toronto, Emma Pace. Hey, Emma, how's it going?
Doing very well, Matt. Yourself?
Doing well. And I'm excited to hear what's going on in the Toronto market because, 2021 has not been a boring year so far when it comes to real estate. So, what are you seeing, Emma?
This was probably the most boring month since we've started chatting, which is, in my opinion, very good news kind of across the board. I mean, maybe less so for people who have considered selling because it's been, an extreme seller's market.
Mm-hmm.
Not to worry though for the sellers out there, we're still in the seller's market. But things have slowed down a little bit when it comes to kind of total number of offers and looking at the pricing, which we'll go over in a second. It's kind of flattened off a little bit, and so I think that's just a little bit of good news across the board for buyers. I mean, less competition. Obviously, there's still multiple offers, but not 10 or I'm not seeing 10 or 15 or anything like that. I think 3 has been the most we've been in the last little while. It's slowed down a little bit in that regard.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's kind of nice to be able to catch your breath. And so I know you've got a presentation together for us, so I'll pull it up here on screen.
Yeah.
And let's jump into the data.
Perfect. So, look, for the majority of the months that you and I have chatted for, it's been plus 4% kind of across the board for many of these months. And so what's been really interesting for the April statistics, condo prices are up and detached prices have remained flat, but we've actually seen a little bit of a decline in condo towns and semis. Nothing drastic. I mean, as far as my perspective on this overall graph is the market's flat, right? We see 2 segments that have kind of increased a little bit and 2 that have decreased slightly, but we're not seeing 5% declines or anything like that. I think it's been more of a flattening of the market, if anything, which is again, good news. It's something that we haven't seen in a little while.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and again, it's been an interesting month, right? Because I think we would have went from one type of lockdown to a different type of lockdown. So again, it seems like the market's just kind of treading water at that level, other than the condo prices, maybe.
I think one good point that you just made about this lockdown, I was actually kind of curious to see what was going to happen because we've never really come out of lockdown in Toronto. So I know a lot of the other markets in Southwestern Ontario were affected quite a bit as a result of the lockdown because it's like for you guys in London, it's like, hey, we opened up, everybody was out, we're going to restaurants, all that kind of stuff. It seemed kind of like life was getting a little bit back to normal, and then you go back down to lockdown. With Toronto, we haven't come out of lockdown since October 9th, right? And so for some of the tightening of the restrictions up until now, we haven't really noticed much of a change as a result of the market because it's just been kind of like status quo since October. Never really been let out of lockdown. But I do think that this most recent lockdown, like the most recent measures, potentially did have an impact. We did have a couple of clients who said, hey, you know what? I think we're going to kind of take our foot off the gas a little bit here and just be a little bit more strategic when it comes to viewings and stuff like that. Now, that probably lasted for the couple of clients that had that approach, maybe 2 to 3 weeks. And then they were just a little bit more strategic in terms of which units they wanted to see. So less tours, less volume in terms of showings, but more strategic in terms of specific units and being a little bit more targeted in terms of the units they went to go see.
Gotcha. Yeah, really appreciate that.
Yeah. So, I mean, look, we'll go through these numbers at the bottom here. Obviously these sales numbers are crazy. I put these up just because I thought they were pretty hilarious. So, of course, to everybody that's watching this, year over year, April was when we saw the most drastic decline in numbers just as a result of the beginning of the formal pandemic. So, you're going to – I wasn't expecting them to be quite this high, but Yes, I mean, kind of comical. We've got, multiple triple digits here, 322%, 287, 469% for condo townhouses, and 372% for condo apartments. So this is total number of sales. But if we look in, into the nitty gritty numbers, there were only 71 condo townhouse sales in the pandemic. So just interesting to see that. But what I think is interesting is, like, we obviously see these bigger year over year numbers, 36%, 19%, 18%, and 19% for price changes. Those are pretty hefty numbers kind of across the board. I think they look pretty crazy, but I do think that they'll likely level off in the coming months. If we kind of look at this, if we look at this chart and the trend lines, we're obviously down quite a bit here. But as we continue to kind of progress through the pandemic, you'll see, if things kind of continue to flatten off, which I think they probably will, we typically do see things slow down a little bit in July and August. So I'm curious to see what's going to happen in the summer, but I think that these numbers will probably tighten up a little bit moving forward for kind of year over year numbers. I'm not sure your thoughts about that, Matt, but that's kind of what I'm thinking.
Yeah, and again, it's really tough when we're looking at the months of, March and April from a 2021 versus 2020 perspective. So completely agree with you on that. And I think the one thing we still don't fully know is, have we experienced 2021 spring market, or is there going to be a delay to that spring market? Because obviously March and February were hot and busy months, but like in 2021, but will we see that pick up again in either May or June? I think is really anyone's guess. Or what's your thoughts?
Well, I was thinking we were going to have this really hot summer because nobody's really traveling, right? And so typically what we see, at least on our end, is July and August tends to lighten up a little bit because people are typically traveling and they just kind of don't. It's just summer. They don't really have their mind just really isn't on real estate. So at the beginning of this year, I thought maybe this will just carry kind of all the way through the year, because I don't suspect that, very many people are going to be traveling. Now, with that said, even for, my team member that is on the phones, since the weather's been nice, getting people on the phone has been quite challenging. I think people are really, taking the advantage of being able to kind of go outside and parks and all of that kind of stuff. So I am curious to see if the summer is going to be a little bit slower, just as a result of people having been in their house for so long and just not wanting to focus on this and just kind of enjoying the time outside while we have the nice weather. So I'm curious to see.
Yeah, I think only time will tell.
Yeah, for sure. So we have, I wasn't able to get an updated chart, but looking at this chart that we looked at last month, we were about 702 or 705 last month for overall condo prices. We're now sitting at 727, so we've slightly passed the peak of the market, but we've kind of reverted, we've reverted all of those losses essentially. So I think it was kind of underwater as a result of, the pandemic has kind of flattened back out. So the average price is back to kind of where we were pre-pandemic for condos.
Interesting. And do you think, does that change any of the mentality? I'm just curious, some of the people that bought kind of the peak last year around February, end of January, March, early March, whether, I imagine some people were kind of panicking last year when they saw the initial drop, but I imagine those that were kind of panicking, they now wouldn't choose to sell to break even. You know what I mean? I think there's just an interesting human emotion element to this as well, that sometimes the chart doesn't fully show, where people hate losses, but they also hate missing out on something. And so I imagine some of the people that, if you were to literally rewind a year ago, they were like, man, I wish I never bought that condo. If I could just walk away and hand everything back and hit an undo button, I would. I imagine those people in today's market, actually, given the chance, probably wouldn't hit that undo button.
Yeah, I don't think so. But I mean, I think it's tough with us because we do such a thorough, and you and I were talking about this just before the video here, but we do such a thorough analysis before we onboard clients to understand what their goals are. And usually if someone says, hey, this is only going to be a 1-year plan for me, our advice to them is we don't actually think that you should be making this move in most scenarios. So for us, I think most of our clients that did buy in and around this time frame, we've already had that conversation with the bulk of our clients of like, are you going to be willing to hold on to this thing for at least 5 years? Understanding that with the way that the market has moved, the majority of our condo buyers actually do end up trading up between year 2 and year 4, just because the market has been favorable for them. But as part of our client onboarding process, we do try and really understand someone's needs and their financial wherewithal to be able to withstand something like this. And we obviously haven't seen this, but I haven't had any clients who had purchased, in and around here that have said like, hey, I'm bummed out about my decision.
Yeah. Yeah. And understanding what your long-term plan or goal is key there, right? To being able to ride any of that short-term volatility. Yeah,
totally. So, I guess good news across the board is, those losses have been turned around. But I think, for me, having a boring month in real estate is sometimes good news. Yeah, so looking at months of inventory and then having a peek at March, which is what we looked at last month, and then April, the good news is we're starting to see things increase a little bit. Now, again, sellers, this doesn't mean that we're in a balanced market or anything like that. Sub 4 when it comes to inventory still means that we're in a seller's market. Anything around 1 is still an extreme seller's market. But to be able to see this kind of move, north of 1 in certain circumstances is, more healthy in my opinion.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely, like, for most buyers, this is going to be a move in the right direction, where at least it's going to alleviate some of the pressure.
Yeah, and so what this means is more options and typically, like I had said earlier, less bidding wars. So we're still, don't get me wrong, we're still seeing bidding wars and there's still certain properties that are getting a ton of offers. But I think when you start to see months of inventory add up a little bit, that means that there's more stuff for people to be bidding on. And as a result, the buyer pool kind of thins out a little bit. And so less total offers on each individual property typically.
And so at this stage, I'm imagining like your strategy trying to buy hasn't changed that much, say, versus last month or the month before?
Yeah, it's been, our approach with most clients is always a slow and steady approach, right? Our approach is always one of coming from education and making sure that any client that we work with is in a position where they are able to pull the trigger. Doesn't necessarily mean that you have to go out and have FOMO and pull the trigger right away. So our approach has kind of remained the same with clients. I think at this point in time, the good news is for us to kind of find those diamond in the rough deals. They're a little bit, they come forth a little bit more often, or we've seen them a little bit more where it's like, oh, wow, that seller was willing to take that price. That's, there's some opportunity there for buyers where, 2 months ago when you and I were chatting, it was just like, put in an offer and then, cross your fingers and pray. And now we have a little bit, I think we can strategize maybe a little bit more with specific properties.
Yeah, I appreciate the perspective.
Yeah, so again, we talked about kind of sales numbers last month. And so, April was our biggest April across Treb history with 13,000 total sales. And then, we had that absolutely crazy month March, and then we trailed just kind of in behind it. With that said, we were still 2,000 sales shy, which is pretty substantial. But, 2021 has proven to be a lot of data points on the marker there for sure.
Yeah, it's interesting. Really appreciate you sharing this perspective. Again, not that this necessarily, immediately changes how someone's going to buy a piece of property, but I think it helps just fit into the bigger narrative of what's going on from a big picture perspective. Yeah,
for sure. And so what I wanted to do was I actually wanted to break this down further for this video to show you guys, because obviously we focus a lot on condos. We do freehold sales as well, but I wanted to kind of showcase what the condo volume looks like in comparison to the overall market. And so for Toronto condos, we saw of the total number of sales that have happened, so the 13,000, they made up 17% of the total market. just specifically for condos. So just over 2,200 sales. Now, when I break that down even more specifically to people who are looking for condos downtown Toronto, so CO1 and CO8, if we look on the TREB map, that would be like right downtown. Okay.
Gotcha.
And so those two particular geographical segments of TREB made up 968% of 968 total sales. So almost half of the total sales have happened like literally right in the downtown core of Toronto. And then we also have clients that are in the luxury market, and we also have clients who are looking to get a good deal. Like a lot of investors obviously want to come through and buy the lowest price condos. So people always ask me, is it still realistic to expect that I could buy something for under $500,000 in Toronto, right? And so looking at both of those segments, we had 46 total sales in the downtown core, right, that were under 500,000 in April, right? So less than 5% of the market is happening under $500,000, okay? And this is taking into account these two areas downtown, which is where a lot of people are looking to buy condos if you're buying in Toronto.
Right.
Okay? And then if we look at the luxury market, we had 103 of these 968 sold over $1 million. Okay. And then I broke it down even further to kind of like the ultra luxury, which is the 1.5 million plus. Okay. And we had about 34 sales. So if we look at these numbers, totaling these together, that is about 15%. And so 85% of the condos that are selling in the downtown core are selling between $500,000 and $1 million.
Right. Yeah.
And so I think that's really good perspective for people to understand, kind of what that variance looks like. This still occurs, but it's rare. So your total number of inventory, if you're looking for something around $500,000, that extra 50K, that extra 75K could be like night and day difference.
Yeah, that's a great perspective there, that just like really understand what does that dollar amount afford you, because yeah, I imagine just that entry level price point of under $500,000 is very competitive, and you likely have to approach your negotiations differently in how you try and acquire if you're going to be in that price point versus the 600,000.
Yeah, honestly, you'll probably have twice as much inventory to look at. And I think the other thing that's probably the bigger point to all of this is, of these 46 sales, many of them occurred in certain towers, which would not, I would say, you know what, you're better off just saving the extra 5 or 10K for your down payment and just waiting than just trying to dump your money into this particular building downtown, which tends to have, financing issues or lending issues or management issues, that kind of thing. So I think that's just really important to understand, like, they do exist, but when we break this down even further, if 20% of those 46 condos were in a particular building that has issues, you want to understand that.
Yeah, that's a great perspective. That's something that I don't know a lot about, but that's why, having an expert like Emma is so important. Yeah,
but I think overall, it's really good to understand if you're looking for a condo and you're kind of 550 and 850, you're very, there's the bulk of the inventory that's trading downtown is trading in your range.
Yeah.
Right. And then, I have a couple of people that have requested getting luxury condo market updates. So for this particular one, I pulled all of the data above 1.5 million. And so we had a total of 34 properties that sold in the downtown core that were luxury condos with an average sales price of around 2 million. Okay. And so I think the most important thing for anybody who's looking in this price range to understand is most of them are selling around 97% of list price. And so you aren't expecting to get into a bidding war when it comes to kind of
right.
price. Obviously the buyer pool is smaller, but it is important to kind of look at these numbers to understand like what's actually happening and how many of these condos are actually trading. There isn't a whole heck of a lot of inventory to look at. Like 34 total sales that have happened. It's a very small portion of the market.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, this is great though to see, because obviously, it takes a little bit longer. Things move a little bit slower just because there is less competition going on at that price point.
To be honest, these things actually, they don't take a heck of a long time to sell. Like 27 days on market is the average. So they're still typically moving within a month. And the ones that I've pulled here, like if we look back to this trend, so dividing these two to like ultra luxury and then luxury over $1 million, you know, there's only 34 total sales, whereas obviously these 34 are added into these 103.
Yeah.
Right. But it really does get a little bit tight from an inventory perspective. However, these particular ones above 1.5 are often ones where you're going to get, you know, really large square footage, wine cellars, elevators, like that kind of thing. So you're going to have some really, really amazing amenities when it comes to these particular properties. It's just really important for anybody to understand that, like, you might have to wait a little bit. If you're in this price point, you need to expect that your search process could take longer than the average person's, just given the fact that there isn't a whole heck of a lot of inventory that does come to market. So you might have to, you know, be a little bit more patient.
Yeah, really appreciate that perspective, Emma.
Right. So then just to kind of tie it all together, I wanted to just break down what a $550,000 condo downtown Toronto, so just kind of a one bedroom. If you're an end user and an investor, what are the minimum requirements for you to kind of get into the market? And so if you're purchasing something for $550,000, you know, the minimum requirement for you to be able to get into the market, like this is closing costs, all of that kind of stuff as a first-time buyer, would be just shy of $40,000 cash. That's what you need cash on hand to be able to close on this property, right? And then your monthly expenses, taking into account property taxes and under utilities, I kind of put your maintenance fees here and insurance, about $3,000 a month. So if you're just looking at kind of high level, like, hey, can I make this happen financially? You need about 40 grand and you need to be able to substantiate about $3,000 a month in payments. So if it's a couple looking to kind of invest your cash and you each have 20 grand saved in your RSP and you guys can each float $1,500, then this is a feasible solution for you, right? If not, then we need to look at some alternative solutions, but this would be what I would consider kind of minimum requirements to enter the market in a condo downtown. Yeah.
That's awesome.
And flip side for investors would be, you know, you've got to have 20% down. And so you need about 118,000. Usually I'm going to, you know, for most of my investors, keep a little bit of a float for vacancies, you know, 2 or 3 months on top of this. So maybe that ends up being closer to 125. And then utilizing the same property details, that's about 2250 for carrying costs. What I think is really, really interesting, though, is the rental market is the one thing that I think got really interesting this month, because I'm starting to see things turn around in the rental market, which has been beat up for, you know, pretty much a year now. And so here are just some examples of, like, even in the last week, listed for $1950, rented for $2050. Right? So I'm starting to see, like, I've seen 11 offers on a rental condo this last week, right? And so I'm curious to see, and just here, you know, this is over the last week, the average is 100% of asking, which is something that we hadn't seen for the last couple of months. People were usually still negotiating off list price for leases. And so if we start to see this come back a little bit and the rental market stabilizes, and prices flatten off. Right now, if we look at high level numbers, the average rental price being $1,800, and we go back here and we say $2,200. Okay, well, you know, we're at $400 a month or whatever the situation is. But if we start to see this gap close, there may be an opportunity over the next couple of months, which I'm curious to kind of keep my eye on for investors. Are we going to see that gap close, and are we going to be able to find something closer to break even? If sales prices flatten off and the rental prices continue to increase, I'm curious to see if there's going to be an opportunity there that we haven't seen in a while.
Yeah, definitely keep us posted, because I know people love it when you do your number deep dives and kind of break things down. So if you start to see a couple interesting properties either come up or end up selling, I know the audience would love to see your analysis.
Yeah, I'll keep you guys posted over the next couple months. To be honest, this is probably some of the most exciting or interesting data that I think we need to follow over the next couple months, because we haven't really seen this in a while. And with interest rates still being very low, the overall returns for condo investments, they could be some of the best that we've seen in the last couple of years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's awesome, Emma.
And that's pretty much all I have for you guys today, but I appreciate you having me on.
Excellent. Yeah, always appreciate you jumping on, just sharing your experience and perspective. And so if people want to get in contact, we'll throw links in the video description down below. And just want to encourage people to reach out, have a chat with you. As Emma even mentioned just on this call, it's important that whoever you're working with really understands what's going on in the buildings, right? Especially if we're looking at buying condo units. So, jump on a call, pick Emma's brain or one of her team members and find out, make sure that you're actually setting yourself up for long-term success. Because I think there is going to be, depending on how this market evolves, an opportunity for people to panic and try and FOMO into the market. And as we mentioned, as we kind of hit the new kind of peak in the market cycle, it's important you understand what you got yourself into, make sure that you're getting yourself into the right property so that you're able to hold on for the longer term, and that you're not causing yourself a bunch of, panic or turmoil or just unnecessary angst when it comes to owning real estate.
I absolutely agree. Like Matt had said, knowing that, especially when it comes to condos, knowing the ins and outs of particular buildings, because there are external factors outside of your own personal analysis that could affect the marketability of that property in the future. And so we need to take multiple layers of precautions and due diligence when we're buying condos to make sure that even if your analysis is perfect, are there going to be other factors that could influence sales pricing or your ability to even sell that condo in a couple of years from now, just based on certain things that are happening in the building? So make sure that you do your research on that.
Awesome. Thanks, Emma.
Yeah, thanks, Matt.